I'm Brigadier General Norman Gaddis, a native of Tennessee, and I was elated and pleasantly surprised when I was notified that I would be inducted into the Hall of Fame. I grew up in Tennessee, but then when I went into the Air Force, I served all over the world and finally ended up in North Carolina. But my heart is always in Tennessee. I appreciate the people here. I love them, and it's good to be back among them.
Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame is pleased this evening to honor Brigadier General Norman C. Gaddis. Norm Gaddis was born in Jefferson County, Tennessee in 1923. He entered the Army Air Corps in 1942, was commissioned in 1944. He flew the P-40 Warhawk and the P-51 Mustang in World War II. He was released from service in 1945, then recalled in 1949. Gaddis served 3 years with the 86th Fighter Wing in Neubiberg, Germany, flying the P-47 Thunderbolt and the F-84 Thunderjet. In 1952, he was transferred to the 31st Fighter Wing at Turner Air Force Base, flying F-84 Thunderjets. It was during this time he flew the first ever fighter jet crossing the Pacific Ocean. In 1954, he was assigned to the 81st Fighter Wing, Royal Air Force, in Bentwaters, England, and subsequently reassigned to the United States Air Force European headquarters in Wiesbaden, Germany, in 1955. In 1957, Captain Gaddis was assigned to the 450th Fighter Wing at Foster Air Force Base, Texas. A year later, he became the flight instructor in the F-100 Super Sabre at the United States Air Force Fighter Weapons School at Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. Major Gaddis entered the Air Command and Staff College at Maxwell Air Force Base in 1960. In 1961, he became a staff officer in the Tactical Division Headquarters, United States Air Force. In 1965, as a lieutenant colonel, he attended the National War College, followed by F-4 Phantom combat crew training in 1966. In 1966, Colonel Gaddis was assigned to the 12th Tactical Fighter Wing at Cam Ranh Bay Air Base in Vietnam. During his 73rd combat mission on May 12, 1967, he was forced to bail out of his aircraft near Hanoi. He was captured and became a prisoner of war in North Vietnam for 2,124 days. He was released on March 4, 1973. After a 90-day convalescence, Gaddis resumed service with the 82nd Flying Training Wing at Williams Air Force Base in Arizona and became its commander in 1974. Later that year, Brigadier General Gaddis served as Deputy Director for Operational Forces in Washington, D.C. Norm Gaddis military decorations and awards include the Distinguished Service Medal, the Silver Star with Oak Leaf Cluster, the Legion of Merit, the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Bronze Star Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster and a V device, the Air Medal with 5 Oak Leaf Clusters, the Air Force Commendation Medal, the Army Commendation Medal, the Purple Heart with Oak Leaf Cluster, the Air Force Outstanding Unit Award Ribbon. A command pilot, he has logged over 4,300 flying hours. He retired after 30 years of active military service in June 1976. For his extraordinary and enduring accomplishments to aviation for Tennessee, our nation, and the world, and for his service to our country, Brigadier General Norman C. Gaddis, United States Air Force retired, is honored by and inducted into the Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame this 12th day of November 2011. Ladies and gentlemen, Brigadier General Norman C. Gaddis.
I think General Gaddis's 2 sons are going to come and bedeck him in his medallion. If they would come on up. Oh, I'm sorry, it's sneaking behind me.
All right. We have a few words to say, and then we'll do that.
Okay, and then he'll have a few words.
He'll have a few words to say as well. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. What a lovely group of people you are, lovely and handsome. We all have cleaned up very well, and it's really nice. It's a privilege to be here tonight to honor a good man, a good citizen, and a good soldier. My father's asked me to reflect on life as a child in the military. As I think back on it, one of the salient facts of life as a so-called military brat was that I think we moved on average every 3 years. By the way, I do want to claim that I was not a military brat. I was never a brat. Well, maybe. Living in many different places, each with its own culture and its own landscape, broadened one's view of the world in a rich way. Frequent moves also taught one to have a sense of how to find a way to be at home. With this broad base of experience, there were incidents that I would say fell in the category of lost in translation. My father likes to remember that the time we had just arrived back in the United States in 1952 after 3 years in Germany, and we were on a flight from New York to Knoxville, as I believe, and I was sitting next to some businessmen, and I was blabbering because we Gaddis men start out talking, I think, at a very early age, unlike other little boys. And at some point I mentioned how the trip had started back to the United States for us by going to the Hauptbahnhof, drawing quizzical looks. My parents had to translate the train station. The sense of finding home came to me again a few years ago when I returned to Europe for the first time for 40 years. I had flown into Switzerland and was getting ready to fly to Milan, and as we took off, looked down as pilots and flyers looked down on the land, and I saw this quilt of farms, fields, villages, and I suddenly had this feeling of being back to one of my homes. This was a sense of being back to Germany in 1952. In 1949, at the age of 3, I left Tennessee, never to have lived here again. We came back to visit numerous times, and as we came back this time, I feel a sense of being at home. How appropriate to be at home among relatives and friends in these familiar hills, to honor my father, Norman Gaddis.
So Dad also asked me to say a few words about what it was like growing up in the military. And, you know, one of my character flaws is I was never really a very good listener. I wanted to share with you a few things about what I learned about my dad. You know, over the course of 55 years, you sort of get a clue. You know, when he went to Washington, I was 4, and I don't think you can claim much consciousness at age 4. Dad disappeared into the Pentagon for 5 years, and then he was in War College. And most of our interactions were, son, eat your peas. You cannot leave the table till you're done. And nope and yeah are not the right answers. It's yes, sir, and no, sir. So he went to Vietnam, and I was 10, and he was shot down. And, you know, it was pretty hard. Went to POW/MIA family meeting in Washington, D.C. Mom got very active in that. Mom fulfilled many interesting roles as Dad was gone. And I was the first meeting, and Mom really wanted me to listen. And I listened to the people who were there. And there was a bunch of people who were really frustrated. And I was probably 12, and I didn't realize it, but that's how you define victimhood. You know, everything was against those people. The government wasn't working on their behalf. And, you know, it really struck me like they were probably missing some opportunities. I was very frustrated. And Mom said, hang on a second, there's somebody coming up to speak next. I want you to listen to him. That somebody was General Chappie James. I don't know if any of you ever have had a chance to meet him or know him or read his biography. He stood up and he said, okay, look, here's what you got to do. He just laid it out point by point by point. He said, you guys can overcome this stuff. You can get what you need, and here's how to do it. Here's how I'm going to help you do it. I thought, wow, this is a guy who makes things happen. And you know, over the course of his career, I followed it quite a bit. He really was a guy who made things happen. He made the right thing happen. Even when all the POWs got off the plane, he was the first one to greet them. He totally violated all the protocol because all of his activities. Anyway, I was just in awe of the guy. He came up to me afterwards. Mom wanted to introduce him. And he said, look, I flew with your dad. He's the best. It's like, wow. What do you do with that? I mean, Dad, that was really pretty special. Dad came back, and we were at Andrews Air Force Base. And, you know, this was the guy I was in awe of, the one who I had to say yes sir, no sir to, and make sure I didn't mess that up. And he comes out after debriefing, and he starts to tell these stories about how the speaker wires were within reach in the Hanoi Hilton. And every night when they'd pipe in the propaganda, they finally got fed up with it, and they reached up, and all of the soldiers pulled the wires out of the speakers. I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. Then he started telling me the story about the day that they tried to drag him downtown on a propaganda tour. The order was given, they all stayed in their underwear. And Dad's describing this battle against the guards where they're wrestling with the guards not to be put on the bus. I thought, wow, you know, this was the age of civil disobedience back in the late 60s and early 70s, and Dad was doing that. And that was another aspect which I never even imagined. Then we went out to Williams Air Force Base, and that was fascinating. I mean, I was around a bunch of people, you know, the young guys who just get into flying and the fighting instructors. There's testosterone is the word that I remember probably the most with those guys. There was one guy who was telling me the stories about his first year as a freshman at the academy. He goes, yeah, they were really hazing me until one of them asked me what was it I did in my spare time, and I told him I was a champion Brahma bull rider. They said they didn't give me any crap after that. So, you know, these guys were just amazing to be around, and all of them would come up to me and say, you know, your dad, he's the best. He's the old Air Force. And that really meant a lot to me in terms of doing it. And, you know, it was pretty interesting because over the years, Dad and I had some chances to talk. I was the prodigal son for about 30 years out on the West Coast. Electronics industry was very good to me. But I came home and we had a lot more time to spend and talk. And, you know, I think the main thing that I want to leave as a message was one time when we had a really long discussion about the day he was shot down. The thing I realized is, number one, Dad loved flying fighters more than just about anything else in his life. He was really pretty good with the family, don't get that wrong. But outside of the family, flying fighters. He was incredibly dedicated to do the hard missions and do it well. And I think the thing that was most important is he would never ask anybody to fly a mission he wouldn't lead himself. And his top priority was the mission and getting everybody else home. Now that says, I think, who Dad is, really at the base of him. Now I have one other story to tell. So I told you I wasn't going to be short. I don't listen very well. And I'm doing this on the behalf of Mom and I. Okay, so Dad gets back. They talk about that 90-day convalescence. There was this party in Dallas that Ross Perot and several other people put on. And all of the POWs and their families were flown down. And I remember the first afternoon, it was a hot afternoon in Dallas, we were out by the swimming pool. Now, Dr. Pepper had decided they were going to be a sponsor that afternoon. Let's see, there were some people out there serving Dr. Pepper. Now, for those of you who may not remember, at that point in the 70s, hot pants were the thing. Imagine taking what you might call your stereotypical 20-year-old Texas woman, putting her in hot pants, a really tight t-shirt with Dr. Pepper label on the front. And we were sitting there watching these guys, and it was like whiplash. And I don't think any of them have drank that much Dr. Pepper since then. Now, the reason I bring this up is because it really became a funny story that would trot out in the family from time to time. And Mom, bless her heart, whenever, there must have been some discussion they had later that I never was privy to, but if Dad ever started feeling his oats too much, she'd sort of look down over his glasses and said, now, Norman, remember those Dr. Pepper girls?